There's a certain type of person you've probably noticed. Everyone around them is talking about the latest trend, a viral sound, a new gadget, a movie that's dominating every conversation. Social media is flooded with it. Group chats won't stop. It's everywhere. And this person? Completely unbothered. Not performing indifference, not trying to be cool, just genuinely uninterested. And almost immediately, people have opinions about that. He's so boring. She thinks she's better than everyone. He's just trying to look different. But here's what those opinions completely miss. Not following trends isn't a personality flaw. It isn't arrogance. It isn't an act. It is one of the rarest and most misunderstood psychological traits a person can have. And science has a very specific name for it and a very clear explanation for why people who have it are wired fundamentally differently from the majority. This video is about what that trait actually is, where it comes from, and why the people being called boring might actually be the most psychologically grounded people in the room. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch ran one of the most revealing experiments in the history of social psychology. He put a group of people in a room and showed them a simple image, a line on a card. Then he showed them 3 other lines of different lengths and asked one question: which of these 3 lines matches the original? The answer was obvious, completely clear, no room for genuine confusion. But here's the setup. Everyone else in the room was an actor, and the actors all gave the wrong answer, confidently, unanimously. And what happened? Approximately 75% of real participants gave the wrong answer at least once, not because they couldn't see the truth, but because the social pressure of being the only dissenting voice was psychologically overwhelming. They knew the right answer, and they still conformed. Now think about what that means outside of a laboratory. Every viral trend, every sound, every challenge, every collective obsession that sweeps through social media is running a version of this experiment on millions of people simultaneously. And a majority will follow, not because they genuinely care, but because the human brain is wired to prioritize belonging over individual judgment. The people who don't follow, they're not immune to social pressure by accident. Their brain is doing something fundamentally different. Psychology draws a sharp distinction between 2 types of motivation, and understanding this distinction explains everything about the person who doesn't follow trends. Extrinsic validation means self-worth is built from the outside in: approval, likes, participation, belonging. These are the things that make a person feel valuable. And there is nothing shameful about this. It is the default human setting. Evolution literally wired us this way because being accepted by the group was once a matter of survival. Intrinsic validation means self-worth is built from the inside out. A person's sense of value doesn't fluctuate based on whether they're participating in what everyone else is doing. It doesn't require external confirmation to stay stable. Research from the field of self-determination theory, developed by psychologists Deci and Ryan at the University of Rochester, found that intrinsically motivated individuals consistently demonstrate higher psychological well-being, greater emotional resilience, and more authentic decision-making than those driven primarily by external validation. They're not chasing the feeling of fitting in because they're not running from the feeling of standing out. When a trend goes viral, the extrinsically validated brain asks, am I part of this? The intrinsically validated brain asks, do I actually care about this? Those are 2 completely different questions, and the answers lead to 2 completely different lives. Here's where something important needs to be addressed directly. The person who doesn't follow trends gets misread almost universally. And the misreading happens for a very specific reason. When the majority of people participate in something, there's an unconscious social contract created, a shared experience, a collective identity built around a moment. And when someone opts out, the natural human interpretation isn't they must have different values. The natural interpretation is they must be judging us. It triggers something psychologists call social comparison threat. The discomfort of being around someone who isn't playing the same game because their non-participation implies the game might not be worth playing. So the labels come out: boring, arrogant, trying too hard to be different. But those labels say far more about the observer than the observed. Because the truth is, the person not following the trend isn't making a statement about anyone else. They're simply not experiencing the internal pull that everyone assumes is universal. They don't need the trend to feel connected. They're already connected to themselves. So what does this actually look like in real life? It looks like the person who doesn't watch a show just because everyone's watching it and spends that time on something that genuinely matters to them instead. It looks like the person who doesn't buy the new gadget the moment it drops, not because they can't afford it, but because the social pressure to have it simply doesn't register as a compelling reason to order it. It looks like the person who sits quietly in a conversation where everyone is performing excitement about something, not out of superiority, but out of an honest unwillingness to perform emotions they don't feel. And here's what all of those behaviors have in common. They require a settled sense of self that most people spend their entire lives trying to build. The ability to exist comfortably outside of the current of what everyone else is doing without anxiety, without the compulsive need to explain yourself, without quietly wondering if you're missing something. That is not a personality defect. That is psychological groundedness in one of its purest forms. The world will keep calling it boring. Psychology calls it something else entirely. It calls it autonomy, and it is one of the 3 core pillars of genuine human well-being. Trends are not meaningless. They connect people. They create shared culture. They are a legitimate way that human beings bond with each other, and there is real value in that. But the quiet person in the corner, the one who's not watching, not participating, not performing excitement they don't feel, they are not broken. They are not arrogant. They are not trying to be anyone. They simply don't need the external world to tell them who they are. And in a world that is louder, faster, and more relentlessly trance-driven than any point in human history, that kind of internal stillness isn't a flaw. It's one of the rarest things a person can have. Not everyone who follows trends lacks self-awareness, and not everyone who ignores them has it either. But the capacity to sit outside the wave, calm, unbothered, completely certain of your own compass, that is not something that happens by accident. It is built quietly from the inside out, and the people who have it usually stopped needing anyone to understand it a long time ago. One question, and this one is worth sitting with. When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to, not because everyone else was doing it, and not because you were consciously avoiding it either, just because it was genuinely yours? Drop it in the comments, because that answer tells you something about yourself that no trend ever could.